My name is Jenica Smith, and I'm a full-time faculty member in the English program at SWIC. Before becoming a faculty member at SWIC, I spent several years providing Blackboard support and instructional design assistance to faculty at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. During that time, I helped faculty build quality face-to-face, hybrid, and online courses. In this video, I'll share with you some tips on how to curate and create effective learning materials. This video will discuss aligning your learning materials with your objectives, providing students with opportunities to practice skills before assessment, providing content that is timely, varied, and easy to comprehend, modeling the academic integrity we expect from our students, and a discussion on open educational resources and creating your own content. When we talk about aligning your learning materials, what we're really talking about is making sure that those learning materials are in line with your objectives and your assessments. You want to make sure that your learning materials are going to prepare students for the assessments that they have to take in your course. So if they're going to be tested on a particular objective or skill, you want to make sure your learning materials are going to prepare them for that test. Also, you want to make sure that you're building skill chains and that your learning materials are scaffolded in such a way that new skills are built on pre-existing skills. So skills that they have either learned previously in the course, from other courses, or from their own past experiences. You also want to make sure that you're engaging the multiple learning styles that your students are coming into the course with. Not all students learn the same way, and you want to make sure that your learning materials address that. And finally, you want to explain the purpose of your learning materials to your students. So why are you having them read this particular passage, engage with a certain type of content, or why are you having them participate in a particular activity? So you want to make the purpose for those learning materials clear so they have an understanding of why they're doing that activity, and it doesn't feel like it's just busy work that's not relevant to the course. In my video, Assessment Map in Action, I talked about breaking your course down into chunks and how you achieve this by determining logical breaks in your course materials. The reason for this relates to how we process information, specifically our working memory, which can only hold about 5 bits of information at any given moment. If a learner's working memory is full, any additional information is not going to be retained. So you want to break your content down into reasonable chunks that students can easily digest. You also want to scaffold your content so that students are building on existing and newly acquired skills, like we talked about in the previous slide. Think about a video game like Super Mario. As a player, you first learn how to walk, then jump on things, and a ton of other skills. But each of those new skills builds on a previous skill. That's one of the aspects I love about games and game theory, is the way they scaffold skills and learning. In a lot of ways, building a quality course is like developing a video game. You want to start with tutorials that teach students how to use a system, and then with each new level, build on skills that they've learned either from previous levels or even previous games, and in our case, previous units or previous courses. Just like with your assessments, you want to have a variety of ways for students to engage with your learning materials. We need to consider the way that students engage with content outside of school. Unless it's a TV show or movie on Netflix, most of the content our students engage with is meant to be consumed quickly, usually in less than 5 minutes. I mean, with the advent of TikTok, less than 60 seconds. When you're curating or designing your learning materials, you want to keep that in mind. Ask yourself, can this text be read in less than 10 to 20 minutes? Is there an alternative form to this text, like a video or audio version? What if my student has a physical or learning challenge that makes reading long texts or watching an hour-long video difficult? Is there a way I can address that with my learning materials? Also, you want to find content that is engaging, which can be difficult for some subjects, I know. People learn better when they can see the practical application of your content. This is one of the reasons why I love using YouTube videos. Chances are somewhere, someone has made a really engaging video about almost every subject. Sometimes you have to dig a little bit to find those videos, but they are out there. Also, it's helpful to find videos that show the real-world application of how students can use this knowledge outside of the classroom. Finally, try new things. Even if they don't turn out the way you expected, at least you've learned something from the experience. Building an effective course, whether it's online or face-to-face or hybrid, is about continuous improvement. Maybe you tried something and it didn't work. Maybe only part of it was successful. Then you take the part that did work and build on that. When it comes to trying new things, I would encourage you to look at the world outside of education. What are the innovations currently happening in your field of expertise? What innovations are happening in other fields that you can bring into the classroom? As a Gen X/millennial myself, I think about where my students are. For example, this past summer, before we had Teams fully set up on campus, I started using Discord with my students. Discord is a chat client used mostly by gamers in the gaming community to connect with one another. Several of my students were actually familiar with Discord as gamers, so it was an easy transition for them to use it for class. Like with Teams, it gave me a space to have synchronous conversations with my students, which I found to be more helpful than a back and forth email chain. In my video about course and unit objectives, I talk about writing objectives that are easy for your students to understand. Well, the same applies to your learning materials. You want to make sure your learning materials are written in an understandable way for your students. The language needs to be accessible for the level of student in your course. Ask yourself, can my students understand this content? If the content is complex, do I have activities that will help them comprehend what it's saying? For example, one of my learning units is reading and thinking critically. I purposely give my students a couple of difficult academic articles as a way to teach them how to read that kind of writing. We do several activities with those readings, including a group annotation activity and then an individual annotation activity. Then I have them use the texts as part of a critical analysis essay. So they are engaging with these two texts in multiple ways and at multiple levels of understanding. And I take the time to work with them to break down that reading in an understandable way. When I talk about content being up to date, I mean, is that content relevant to this current moment in time? For some of us, our fields are pretty stable. For example, the fundamentals of learning math, like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, are probably not going to have any drastic changes. The way we teach those subjects might change, but the fundamental elements won't. Whereas a field like nursing is more likely to change as new technology and techniques are developed. But regardless of your field, you want your content to be current for what's happening in the world today. The other aspect of being up to date is making sure all of your content actually works. Make sure you're not using outdated websites full of broken links and that your own links in your course are still working. If you're using YouTube videos, check them every semester. Videos disappear all the time from YouTube for various reasons, and you don't want students accessing links or content that isn't there or doesn't work. In my previous role as an instructional designer, one of my focus areas was on copyright and fair use because I was over the media production side of our office. When it comes to using copyrighted material in your courses, there are limitations. A lot of stuff that you can get away with in a face-to-face class, you can't really do online. For example, fair use allows a teacher to show a video in class, but it doesn't allow you to host the full-length video in your online course. Notice how I said host the video. You can link out to a video that someone else is hosting online, but then you have to worry about if that link becomes inactive due to copyright violations. Fair use is one of the exceptions in copyright, which allows for copyrighted material to be used without obtaining permission as long as it's considered fair. The 4 factors of fair use are the purpose and character of the use, so whether it's being used for commercial or educational reasons, the nature of the copyrighted work. If it's a creative work, it's usually going to have more protections than something that's factual like a news article. So the more creative a work is, the less likely you'll be able to use it under the fair use factors. The amount of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole. There's not really a set amount, but the safe estimate is to use 10% or less of whatever the copyrighted work is. And then the effect that it's going to have on the potential market for or value of whatever the copyrighted work is. Is your use of that copyrighted content going to prevent the copyright owner from making a profit off of their intellectual property? So if you're using a portion of a video in a class, that's going to have a less detrimental effect on them making a profit than if you were showing the entire thing and it was available for students to download and access whenever they wanted. So you want to consider those 4 factors when you're determining what kind of content that you're going to use in your class. Alternatively, you want to consider works that are in the public domain or part of Creative Commons. Works in the public domain are those whose intellectual property rights have expired, been forfeited, or are not applicable. Examples include the works of Shakespeare and Beethoven, most of the early silent films, and stuff like the formula for Newtonian physics. Works licensed under Creative Commons are works made for public use and distribution. They come in various forms, sometimes with certain restrictions on how that content can be used. For example, a Creative Commons with a share and share alike non-commercial license means that you can use the content, remix it however you want, with no attribution to the original creator, but it has to be for non-commercial use and must use the same license as the original, meaning you have to make it available for other people to use and remix. And then you have the special case known as the Teach Act. So the Teach Act is when a course is taught either solely online or when components of a face-to-face course are taught online through some type of learning management system. The basic premise behind the Teach Act is to allow comparable instruction in the online environment as to what takes place in a traditional classroom or face-to-face instruction. One of the major requirements of the law is that materials can only be digitally transmitted to students officially registered in the course. Instructors must meet all of the listed teaching requirements to qualify for the Teach exception. Finally, let's talk about open educational resources. One of the biggest advantages of open educational resources, or OER, is that it's licensed under Creative Commons, which means you can avoid a lot of the hassle associated with other types of materials that are copyrighted. An added bonus is a lot of OER content is made by educators, so it's actually on the same level, if not sometimes better, than the same content you could find in a textbook. Also, it's cost-effective for students. One of the biggest issues we're facing are students from low-income families or students who are living at or below the poverty line. OER content makes it easier for those students because it's one less thing they have to pay for, especially since most textbooks are really expensive. Another added perk is you can provide this content on day 1 of your course. You don't have to wait for students to buy the book or worry about a student leaving their readings at home because the content is available online or in your Blackboard course. Almost all of my content is OER, and when I teach face-to-face, I have my students open Blackboard in class and we do the readings from either the computer or they can use their mobile devices. If I'm doing group activities in the classroom, I will usually print a small set for students to share and collect them at the end of class so that I can reuse them for the next class. In a fully online class, they have the content right there, and if I'm working with a student, I can navigate them to a piece of content and we can work on it together in the online class. Finally, you have so many options with OER content. I use a variety of OER textbooks in my courses because I find that no single textbook has everything that I want to cover. One book might have a really good section on audience, while another textbook has a really good section on rhetorical appeals. Using OER content allows me to mix and match from a variety of sources to create the perfect content for my course, which you can't really get when you have students purchasing a textbook unless you're going to write that textbook yourself or you're working with the publisher to make a custom textbook. What's most important, open educational resources allow me to add variety to my learning and materials, which helps to add interest to the course, which makes learning the content more fun for the students. And that wraps up my presentation. Do you want to learn more about curating and creating your own learning materials? Then feel free to leave a comment below or email me at jenica.smith@swick.edu.